The thrum of the lush green countryside was usually a comfort to Cameron Grant. Inside his RV, a rusted, weather-beaten relic that had belonged to his parents, the air smelled of stale coffee and wet grass. For Cameron, this vehicle was more than just a home. It was a sanctuary where he could escape the drudgery of his fast food cashier shifts. Outside, mounted on a rickety tripod, his repurposed TV satellite dish shivered in the breeze, its cheap USB receivers tethered to an old laptop running open-source mapping software. He was a scavenger of the stars, a backyard radio astronomer hobbyist whose passion had been ignited long ago. Orphaned as a teenager, he had inherited little from his impoverished parents, only a rusted RV and a cherished collection of science fiction books about the depths of space. Those stories had fueled his obsession, transforming him from a lonely kid into a man who spent his nights performing radio astronomy scans, capturing the waves of celestial objects using cheap hardware and open-source software. While the world slept, he hunted the whispers of Jupiter and the deep rhythmic pulse of the Milky Way, forever searching for the wonders he had only ever read about. Then the monitor flickered. A jagged, impossible waveform bled across the screen. Not the steady hum of a pulsar, but a rhythmic bioluminescent stutter of data that defied his understanding of physics. Suspense tightened in his chest like a coiled spring. He adjusted the frequency, his fingers trembling. It wasn't just data, it was a broadcast, dense and layered. He converted the stream to audio and donned his frayed headphones. The moment the sound hit his ears, the world dissolved. A high-frequency whine pierced the silence, and suddenly his body locked. His limbs became marble statues. His lungs refused to expand. He tried to scream, but the sound was trapped behind a wall of pure crystalline mental clarity. His brain felt as if it were being overclocked, synapses firing with the violence of a supernova. Neurotransmitters flooded his system, expanding his cognitive horizons until the laws of causality seemed to shimmer and fray. Then the signal snapped into silence. Cameron collapsed, the world fading to black. He woke hours later to the golden light of dawn. His head throbbed, but as he sat up, the world felt different. He looked at a discarded physics textbook on his table, a dense dry tome he'd been struggling with for weeks. He scanned the pages. In 3 minutes, he had absorbed the entirety of the text, his mind cataloging the information with the precision of a high-speed server. He wasn't just smart, he had been rewritten. The signal was a dormant cosmic energy emitted by a star that had died before humanity learned to crawl. Across the vast, indifferent reaches of the galaxy, Cameron had been the only soul in the right place at the right time to capture this signal. Wealth came with the ease of breathing. Using his expanded intellect, he reverse-engineered the complexities of blockchain architecture, developing a mining algorithm so efficient it defied the limits of thermodynamics. With a cluster of 5 discarded GPUs, he generated millions in weeks. But money was a tool, not an end. Cameron sat in the bright, sun-drenched office of his expansive villa, purchased on the outskirts of a secluded rural zone, his mind mapping a global conspiracy. The key lay in the Gluon field, a concept rooted in quantum chromodynamics, the branch of particle physics that describes the strong interaction, which is one of the 4 fundamental forces of nature. By manipulating this field, which bound quarks together, he achieved the impossible, a gluon field stealth device. It didn't just hide an object, it shifted it out of phase with normal matter, allowing it to move through walls, steel, and armor like a ghost through fog. He needed an army. He didn't use recruiters, he used AI. He coded a psychological profiler, a digital sieve that scanned global databases for individuals with a rare specific neurological profile, the predisposed potential for absolute, unshakable loyalty. He found his 200 men. They were lonely, forgotten, and precise. Once gathered, they became his Shadow Legion. The mission began on a cloudy, moonless night. He divided his men into squads of 12, each equipped with the stealth devices and high-precision interface tools. The suspense was suffocating as the first team infiltrated the command bunker of an intercontinental ballistic missile silo. They walked through the reinforced steel vault doors, their bodies vibrating with the thrum of the stealth devices. The guards, mere feet away, felt nothing but a draft as the ghosts passed by. The team plugged a custom USB into the air-gapped control panel. Cameron, sitting in his office, felt the digital handshake across the globe. Simultaneously, across every nuclear-capable nation, teams disabled anti-ballistic missile batteries. They turned the world's defensive eyes blind. Cameron signaled the trigger. Every silo opened. Every missile rose into the sky, a plume of fire against the stars. The world's governments erupted in chaotic terror. Sirens wailed, and the broadcast networks were hijacked by the sight of thousands of missiles descending toward every major capital on Earth. The governments of the world stared at their screens, the cold reality of their own greed crashing down upon them. They had spent decades building the fire, and now the fire was coming home. Politicians wept. Military leaders looked at the countdowns, 5 minutes to impact, and realized there was no escape. They cursed the day they decided to make a nuclear bomb. The clock ticked down. 4 minutes, 3, 2. Cameron stood in the center of his office, his eyes fixed on a screen showing a global map. 1 minute. The air in the capitals of the world became thick. People prayed, huddled in basements, waiting for the sky to ignite. 10 seconds. Cameron whispered a single word: 0. Silence. The missiles reached the cities, but they didn't detonate. They didn't even collide. As they hit the atmosphere, the Gluon field devices installed on their nose cones activated. The missiles turned into shimmering ghosts, passing effortlessly through the buildings, through the asphalt, and into the crust of the Earth. They continued, untouched, through the planet's core and out into the vacuum of deep space. The world watched in stunned, paralyzed silence. The missiles were gone, drifting into the abyss like spent husks. Cameron Grant sat back in his chair, the glow of his monitor illuminating his face. He hadn't destroyed the world. He had stripped the teeth from the tiger. The leaders of the nations, shaken by the terrifying brush with extinction, now faced a new reality. They had seen the fear of death, and in that fear, the folly of their arsenals became glaringly obvious. Within days, the global narrative shifted from brinksmanship to disarmament. Faced with the reality that their ultimate weapons were now toys that could be rendered useless by a ghost, the world's leaders began the systematic dismantling of their tactical nuclear programs. Cameron turned off his laptop. He was a billionaire, a ghost, and the unintended savior of a species that didn't even know his name. He packed his equipment, stood up from his desk in his office, and walked out directly into the quiet expanse of his farm. Breathing in the crisp, clean air, he plucked an apple from a tree and enjoyed it, profoundly relaxed knowing he had forced the world to dismantle its weapons of mass destruction. In the aftermath of the Ghost event, the world's intelligence agencies, the CIA, MI6, the FSB, and a dozen others, descended into a frantic, disjointed paranoia. They operated on the assumption that such a feat required a nation-state's resources. Their first move was a global digital dragnet. They deployed elite cyber warfare units to trace the signal signatures back to their point of origin, but every path led to a dead end. Cameron's algorithms were not merely encrypted, they were architected using a non-linear logic that the world's most advanced supercomputers couldn't parse. When the NSA attempted to launch a backtrace, their servers were met with a digital mirror, a sophisticated honeypot that trapped their efforts in an infinite loop, feeding them garbage data while simultaneously erasing the footprint of the Shadow Legion. Undeterred, the intelligence community shifted to human intelligence, relying on traditional surveillance. They scoured the globe for anomalous financial activity, assuming the purchase of massive computing power would leave a paper trail. They tracked billions in crypto transactions, but the money was shattered into trillions of microfractions, funneled through defunct accounts that hadn't seen activity in decades. They attempted to identify the Shadow Legion through behavioral pattern recognition, scanning public footage for the specific disciplined movements of trained ghosts. They found nothing. Every time a task force closed in on a suspected node, they would arrive at a deserted warehouse or a perfectly empty room. The desperation of these agencies grew into a dangerous, erratic scramble. Secret projects were greenlit to develop tachyon sensors and exotic radiation detectors in hopes of catching the signature of the stealth devices. They deployed high-altitude drone swarms to monitor rural areas, targeting villas and secluded farms that match Cameron's profile. Yet the technology seemed to warp around them. Time and again, the drones would pass directly over the Shadow Legion's staging grounds, yet the cameras would only record miles of undisturbed, peaceful landscape. The team was never where they were thought to be. They were constantly shifted, moving in and out of the frequency of human perception. The government leaders grew weary and broken, their agents suffering from chronic fatigue and phantom sightings, until finally the obsession was officially abandoned. The world decided that some ghosts were better left unhunted, and the pursuit of Cameron Grant was quietly scrubbed from the ledgers of every intelligence archive on the planet, leaving only the legend of the man who forced the world to grow up.